I have traveled about 5,500 kilometers this month, all the way to the West Coast and back. So as I was preparing this service before we left, I was already thinking about navigating. And I knew I wanted to share with you some of the work that our national church is doing to respond to the climate crisis. And I thought, that's a lot like navigating. How do we navigate something like the climate crisis? So that theme has been part of my month, and I hope it will be part of this message as well. When I think about all the kilometers that we traveled and all the places we saw, I'm really thankful for our GPS navigation system on our car. And my partner, who was doing a lot of the driving, often enjoyed the assisted cruise. That's part of our vehicle. But I couldn't help thinking that even though we are thinking and talking about self-driving cars, that we humans are probably not designed to ever be self-driving beings. We might end up in self-driving cars, but as human beings, we wouldn't do very well if we were self-driven. And that's one of the reasons why I love this scripture that Lori just read for us from the gospel, because it is a text that helps us navigate, right? The people who gather around Jesus, well, they're trying to trick him. They like doing that. They're trying to trick him into the wrong answer or a confusing answer or a too revealing answer. But Jesus responds with this wonderful one commandment. Almost all of us can just remember one commandment. That's good to have all of the law and all of the teachings of the Bible, the wisdom literature and the prophetic literature and the law from the early books of the Bible, all gathered up into one commandment. That's good navigation, I think. When we were in northern BC a few weeks ago, we got to enjoy the night sky there without much light pollution, and so we spent lots of evenings gazing up at the sky and remembering how people have learned to navigate by the stars in all over the globe, and how amazing that is. And then the North Star is another one of those navigational tools that we can count on, one of those things that doesn't move in the sky. It's not always the brightest and easiest to find. I don't know if you've discovered that in your stargazing, but it takes a little work to find the North Star. When I started paying attention to the night sky, I thought it would be very obvious. So it would just stand out and, kind of have arrows pointing to it or something. It doesn't. You have to know what you're looking for to find it. And maybe that's also a good metaphor for the teachings of Jesus. Even though it's fairly easy for us to remember what the great commandment is, love God with all our, see if I can get it right, heart, mind, and soul, and love my neighbor as myself. Like, we can remember that. We could teach kids to remember that. But living it out is a little harder, like finding that North Star and keeping our eye on it while we're busy trotting and watching our step on the ground. This wasn't a difficult answer for Jesus to come up with, because as a Jewish person, he had grown up with that law really written on his heart. I love that description that comes all through the scriptures, especially the prophet Jeremiah talks about the law being written on our heart. And the Jewish people were instructed to establish this law on their lips and to teach it to their children and to put it on their doorposts. It's called the Shema, which is a Jewish word that means hear, and that's the beginning of the source passage in Deuteronomy for Jesus' teaching. Hear, O Israel. And faithful Jewish people still today might say that twice a day, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love the Lord your God. That's the origin of this, and Jesus had it written on his heart and was creating a community of followers that we're invited to be part of, who also have that law written on our hearts, not just memorized in our heads, but written on our hearts. When I get into reading Bible passages, I always wish I could read Hebrew and Greek so I could really understand the deeper meanings of words that get translated. Our new RSV, New Revised Standard Version, that Lori read from, is a really good and faithful English translation. But even it leaves something out. If we look at that first word, heart, love God with all our heart, well, the Hebrew word, labah, isn't just heart. It encompasses the mind. For ancient Israelites and other ancient Near Eastern people, the heart and mind were connected. They weren't as distinct as we might make them. We often think of emotions and our emotional selves and our rational selves being two different things. For Hebrew peoples and for Jesus being a Jewish person, they were very interconnected. They couldn't be taken apart. So heart and mind working together. And the second word, excuse me, that we translate as soul, nefesh, is really about the vital life strength that infuses a whole person. And it's like the power that distinguishes a living person from a corpse, from a dead body. It's that powerful, not something just in our minds or a kind of fanciful idea, but that vital life force that grounds us and moves us in the world. That helps us understand a little bit more of the depth of this commandment that Jesus gives us. And what a good navigation tool for us when we try to grapple with really big, wicked problems. We have quite a few of them as people in the year 2023. One of them is the climate crisis. And there are others that are heavy on our hearts today as we gather for worship, as we turn on the news, as we talk with our neighbors, as we look across the country and across the world. So many. I find the term wicked problem helpful because it helps me understand why they're so hard to get at. Poverty right here in our own rural communities. I live near Carmen. I know that there's lots of people in Portage who also really care about people who are impacted by poverty in your communities. We need a good navigation system to keep us on track. And I think that Jesus' commandment, that one great commandment that comes from deep in Jesus' family tradition, the Jewish tradition, and is offered to us, is just that kind of navigation tool that could be our North Star. This week and next, I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit of good news with you about how we are navigating one of those wicked problems, the climate crisis, together as the United Church of Canada, and working with our ecumenical and interfaith partners and everyone of goodwill. While the commandment that Jesus gives us is helpful for us as individuals in our life of faith, it's certainly something that needs to be lived out in community. These challenges that we face are not any that we can address all on our own. We cannot love God with our whole heart, soul, and mind and might on our own. We need to work together. Did you know that our national church issued its second sustainability report earlier this year? You might find it interesting to dip into the report. There's lots of links to exciting stories about things that are happening in United Churches across the country, how people are sharing their buildings, making them more energy efficient, and many other stories about how we're working together. This morning, I just want to highlight the first two of the 4 climate pillars, and you can find more. There's a link in the information pamphlet for a link to the document, and I hope some of you would be interested and want to learn more about that. The first two pillars are putting our house in order and raising our spirited voices. Putting our own house in order is things like, what is our climate? What is our carbon footprint as a national church? And what can we do about that? And we've made bold commitments to reduce our carbon footprint as a denomination by 80% by 2030. Someone might need to correct me. A lot of that, someone said 80%. I mean, a lot of that has to do with how we run and provide resources in our buildings, because we're really building and property rich as a denomination. So that is one of the strong pushes. And if you look into that section of that sustainability report, there's many examples of creative things that churches are doing to retrofit their buildings or add solar panels. It's interesting to see the regional possibilities and opportunities, and it's inspiring. You'll find stories from Montague, Prince Edward Island, all the way up into northern communities. So I encourage you to look at some of those things that are already happening, because we need to be encouraged when we try to navigate on something as big as the climate crisis. We need to find sources of hope and inspiration. And raising our spirited voices is a section of the report that reminds us of how important it is to work together with other people and other organizations, because there's wonderful things happening with other faith communities and other people of goodwill. And again, we can't do this work alone. This week, I encourage you to take these faith reflections and put them into action in some way in your own life. Maybe you will have time to look at that National United Church report, the sustainability report, and I encourage you to look for some positive examples of things happening. And maybe there's somebody you think at your people you have coffee with, or someone on your street, or a family member who might be interested in hearing that positive story. One of the sources that I really appreciate is a CBC program called What on Earth, bringing us a world of climate solutions. It's always a good dose of optimism with lots of young voices talking about things that are already making a big difference in many different parts of the country or around the world. Or perhaps you are already involved or would like to learn more about what's happening right here in Portage. Most communities have some kind of strategic green plan. What is happening here with your city council and community groups? I would love to hear something about that next week when I come back, before or after church. So I hope somebody does a little research and shares that, not only with me, because I don't even live here, but with someone else in your community who would be encouraged by that. And this is also that we can each continue to love God with our whole heart and mind, with our life strength and our power that God has given us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Our worship will continue with the